About 5 years ago, I was living in downtown Seattle. I was in my early 20s, working a miserable evening shift at a local 24-hour diner, and because of my chaotic work hours, my sleep schedule was completely ruined. I was essentially nocturnal. Because I was so used to being awake when the rest of the world was asleep, I developed a habit of going for long walks in the middle of the night, just to clear my head and get some fresh air after smelling like grease all evening. I usually went out around 1:00 or 2:00 in the morning. At that hour, the city was a completely different world. The heavy daytime traffic was entirely gone. The sidewalks were mostly empty, and the only sound was the low electric hum of the streetlights buzzing overhead. I never really felt like I was in any danger. I am a fairly tall guy. I always stuck to the main, well-lit roads, and I kept my headphones in, though I usually kept the music turned down low, just so I could maintain some basic awareness of my surroundings. One night, it was unusually cold for that time of year. The wind was biting, and the streets were completely dead. I was walking down a long, straight stretch of sidewalk that was lined with closed storefronts and dark, empty apartment windows. It was dead silent. I was looking down at my phone, trying to find a new playlist, when I noticed some sort of movement at the far end of the block out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw a man. He was walking on the exact same side of the street as me, heading in my direction. But as he got a little closer under the harsh yellow glow of the streetlights, I realized he wasn't just walking normally. He was dancing. It was this strange, exaggerated, almost theatrical waltz. He would take 2 elegant, sweeping steps forward, and then do a strange little twirl, never breaking his rhythm. He was moving in a zigzag pattern across the width of the sidewalk. I honestly just figured he was a drunk guy heading home from the bars, or maybe someone who had taken something they shouldn't have. Living in a major city, you see weird stuff all the time. I thought nothing of it. I just casually stepped closer to the edge of the road, right up against the curb, to give him plenty of room to pass by me without any interaction. But as he twirled closer, the details of his appearance started to come into focus, and a cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. He was wearing an old, ill-fitting, faded suit. It looked like something you would find at a thrift store, heavily worn and baggy. But the suit wasn't the weird part. It was his face. His head was tilted completely back, facing straight up at the dark, starless sky, and his face was stretched into this massive, cartoonish, impossibly wide grin. It was the kind of smile that actually looked painful to hold. He looked like a plastic mannequin. He wasn't blinking. He was just grinning wildly at the sky and waltzing toward me, completely silent. My survival instincts finally kicked in. I immediately crossed the street. I didn't run, but I walked briskly to the opposite sidewalk, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead. I just wanted to get away from whatever this was. I kept walking for about half a block, listening for the sound of his shoes on the concrete. Then I heard his footsteps stop. I stopped walking and cautiously glanced over my shoulder. He had stopped dancing. He was standing perfectly still on the other side of the street, directly parallel to me. His body was facing forward, but his head was still tilted back, and his eyes were now locked entirely on me. That horrific, exaggerated smile hadn't moved an inch. I started walking faster. I didn't want to run and show him that I was scared, but my breathing was getting shallow. I made it to the next intersection and looked back again, hoping he was gone. He wasn't. He was crossing the street, heading to my side. But he wasn't walking normally. He was doing this bizarre, exaggerated tiptoe walk, taking massive, silent strides like a cartoon character trying to sneak up on someone. Except he was moving incredibly fast. I froze completely. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I didn't know what else to do, so I yelled out, "What the hell do you want?" in the most aggressive, loud voice I could possibly muster. He didn't answer. He didn't flinch. He just stood there under the streetlight, maybe 20 feet away from me, grinning that horrible, unblinking grin. For a few agonizing seconds, neither of us moved. The silence was deafening. Then he started running. He didn't break his stiff posture. He just sprinted directly at me in a dead, silent sprint, his head still tilted back and his eyes wide open. I turned around and ran faster than I ever have in my entire life. I didn't care about looking tough anymore. I bolted down the sidewalk, cutting through an alleyway and ignoring the burning in my lungs. I didn't look back once. I ran all the way to my apartment building, threw my keys into the lock, shoved myself inside, and slammed the heavy glass doors shut behind me. I ran up to my second-floor apartment, locked my door, and watched the street below through the blinds for over an hour. My heart was hammering against my ribs the entire time. He never walked by. The street remained completely empty. I never took another late-night walk in that city ever again. When I was a kid, my family lived in a pretty rural, isolated part of Michigan. Our property was situated at the very end of a dead-end dirt road. We didn't have any immediate neighbors, and our backyard backed right up against a massive expanse of deep, untamed woods and swamplands. During the day, it was a great place to grow up and explore, but at night, those woods turned into a wall of pitch-black nothingness. It was the kind of dark that feels heavy and suffocating. One humid summer night, when I was about 12 years old, I was sitting out on our wooden back porch. The house was completely quiet. The lights were off, and my parents were fast asleep inside. The only sound was the low, constant buzzing of the cicadas in the tall grass and the occasional croak of a bullfrog. Suddenly, cutting right through the heavy summer air, I heard a sound coming from deep within the tree line. It was a whistle. It was a very distinct, slow, two-note whistle. The first note was high, and the second note dropped lower, holding for a few seconds. I sat up straight in my patio chair and stared out into the darkness. I couldn't see anything past the edge of our manicured lawn. The woods were just a solid block of black. A few seconds later, the whistle happened again. It sounded melodic, deliberate, almost like someone trying to call a dog back to the house. My heart rate picked up a bit. I assumed it was just a strange nocturnal bird I hadn't heard before, or maybe just the wind echoing weirdly through the dense trees. I convinced myself I was just being a paranoid kid, went back inside, locked the sliding glass door, and went to bed. I didn't hear it again for a long time. 2 years later, when I was 14, I woke up suddenly at 3:00 in the morning. The house was dead silent. I was lying in bed, staring at my ceiling, feeling wide awake for no apparent reason. My bedroom was on the first floor, with a single window facing the side yard that bordered the woods. As I lay there in the dark, I heard it again. That exact same, unmistakable two-note whistle. High, then low. Except this time, it wasn't coming from deep in the swamp. It was coming from right outside my bedroom window. I was completely paralyzed. I lay there under my thin sheet, barely breathing, terrified to even turn my head toward the glass. I was waiting for the sound of the window breaking, or for a hand to try and pry the screen open. The whistle didn't repeat, but the silence that followed was agonizing. After what felt like an eternity, maybe 20 minutes later, I heard the faint, heavy sound of footsteps crunching slowly through the dry leaves, fading back into the woods. I didn't sleep a single minute for the rest of that night. Fast forward over a decade later. I am an adult now. I had moved hundreds of miles away to South Dakota, completely leaving those woods, that house, and that creepy memory behind. I had basically convinced myself over the years that the whistling was just a childhood nightmare, a fabricated memory my brain made up to scare me. It was the 4th of July. I am a videographer as a hobby, so I was out near a large public lake, standing alone by the shore and filming the massive fireworks show over the water. The sky was lighting up with booming explosions, and the water was reflecting the brilliant reds and blues. It was incredibly loud, chaotic, and beautiful. There were hundreds of people gathered on the main beach further down, but I had walked to a quieter, darker section of the shoreline to get a better camera angle. About 20 minutes into the show, there was a brief, unplanned pause between the fireworks. The explosions stopped. The cheering in the distance quieted down, and the area went completely dead silent. And then I heard it, drifting across the dark, glassy surface of the lake, clear as day, was that exact same two-note whistle. High, then low. My blood ran completely cold. All the air left my lungs. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I slowly lowered my camera and stared out into the pitch-black water. My brain refused to process what I had just heard. A few seconds later, the fireworks resumed. A massive mortar shell went off in the sky, illuminating the lake in a bright white flash for just a split second. Out in the middle of the water, sitting completely alone in a small unlit canoe, was the dark silhouette of a man. He didn't have a fishing rod. He wasn't looking up at the sky watching the fireworks like everyone else. He was just sitting there in the dark, facing the exact spot on the shore where I was standing. I packed up my tripod and my gear, turned around, and left immediately. I walked back to my car as fast as I could, constantly looking over my shoulder. I still have the video footage saved on a hard drive. If you watch it, you can hear the loud, booming explosions of the fireworks. And then, during the few seconds of dead silence, you can clearly hear the whistle cutting through the night air. I have no idea who that man was, or how he could have possibly followed me halfway across the country, but I make sure my doors are locked every single night.